Colette Reyes was devoutly religious.
She would quote different scriptures.
And she was also highly educated.
She had a degree in chemical engineering.
And with her husband, Arthur, she seemed to be living the American dream.
The 2.5 kids and the husband and everybody sitting at the dinner table together.
But then, after nearly 22 years of marriage,
my dad's been shot.
Colette didn't deny pulling the trigger.
I killed him.
But would the investigation confirm Colette's claim that her marriage was really a living hell?
I constantly got pushed, got slapped.
Or would it reveal that she was the nightmare?
He's been a monster.
Chanting and yelling and screaming.
Told them they were going to hell.
Either way, the result was the same.
She lost it and she snapped.
Arlington, Texas, November 22nd, 2009. It was a peaceful Sunday night in this sprawling suburb of 400,000, wedged between Dallas and Fort Worth.
It's a nice bedroom community, fairly quiet, conservative, with Dallas and Fort Worth as bookends.
It's a clean community, friendly community, wonderful place to raise children.
And that made the frantic call that came into the city's 911 center at around 9:30 that evening even more shocking.
Hello, this is Arlington 911. Is there an emergency? My dad's been shot.
The caller was a high school girl, 17-year-old Gabrielle Reyes.
Are you with your dad right now? No, I ran.
Gabrielle said she was calling from a friend's house down the street where she'd run to get help for her father.
He's on the floor, he's bleeding.
You can hear basically how hysterical she gets.
And the reason Gabrielle was hysterical wasn't entirely the fact that she had just found her father on the garage floor, bleeding from a gunshot wound.
Man, listen to me. Did he do it himself? Did he self-inflicted or someone else did it? I think my mom did it.
Although according to Gabrielle, she hadn't seen the shooting.
I heard a bam. I heard a shot.
But she had run into the garage in time to witness the horrible aftermath.
Her father lying on the garage floor in a pool of his own expanding blood. And that frightens her enough to where she turns around and runs to her friend's house.
And then, as Gabrielle broke down completely, her friend's mother took the phone and pleaded for the dispatcher to send help.
We need to send an ambulance and a cop car now.
And it wasn't just to aid Gabrielle's father, 45-year-old Arthur Reyes. It was also to stop Gabrielle's mother, 50-year-old Colette Reyes, before she claimed another victim.
Her mom is on the loose with this dog. Okay, man, listen to me. Her mom is crazy.
It was only the first in a whole series of stunning revelations about the 50-year-old mother of two. Disturbing secrets that not only pushed her over the edge, they just might keep her out of prison. Born in 1959, Colette Nicholas grew up in the Caribbean nation of Haiti.
Colette was born in Haiti, Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and she was jolly little girl. She was a talker, loved to talk.
Her mother was a seamstress, while her father was one of the city's finest tailors.
They may have even done some tailoring work for high officials in the Haitian government.
However, despite her father's status, life was still a struggle.
Haiti's a poor country, a lot of hardship there.
And like many in Haiti, Colette's family turned to religion for solace.
She was raised as a Christian in a fairly conservative Christian household.
Colette's religious part has always been an extremely important part of her world.
And it would remain an important anchor as Colette's family made a big decision. By the time she was 12, her mother had taken advantage of an opportunity to immigrate to America with the children, while her father remained behind.
My father never really worked and leave here because he had a good business in Haiti.
But for Colette and her brothers and sisters, life in America meant boundless opportunity and education. Bright and ambitious, after high school, Colette attended the Polytechnic University of New York.
She had a degree in chemical engineering.
She loved mathematics and science.
But Colette found more to love in college than just numbers. It was also where she met her future husband. Arthur Reyes had been born in New York, but like Colette, his family had roots in the Caribbean.
His father is from Puerto Rico.
5 years younger than Colette, he was an aerospace engineering major at Polytechnic University and shared her love of math.
He was pretty much a mild-mannered type guy.
He was very smart.
Brains and a Caribbean background weren't all that Arthur and Colette had in common either. There was one final thing that, for her, may have been the most important of all.
He was a leader in their Bible study group.
It wasn't long after they met in Bible study that Colette and Arthur began dating.
She was drawn to Arthur due to the fact that he loved the Lord.
And by 1988, they were engaged.
I remember when he first came and asked for Colette's hands, he had a Bible. All my family think he was very nice, respectful.
After the wedding, the couple moved to California. Arthur, who had just turned 24, was in school, pursuing his master's degree, while Colette, who was 29, supported the couple by taking a job at a research lab.
Colette works 2 jobs to help Arthur go to school. She works as a biochemical engineer, and in between, she does also tutoring.
She also gave birth to 2 daughters, Naomi in 1989 and Gabrielle in 1991. The couple couldn't have been happier.
She was a very good wife and mother. She was crazy about her kids.
Arthur was a loving husband. He loved his children, loved Colette.
When Arthur completed his master's degree, Colette urged him to go even further.
Part of our culture as Haitian is that us women, we push our husband. And Colette was really pushing her husband to get a PhD.
And in 1999, after a decade in California, all that pushing paid off when Arthur got a doctorate in software engineering and a new job.
Arthur became employed by the University of Texas at Arlington.
In Texas, Arthur spent his days in class, while Colette, now a full-time mom, made friends with the other families in the neighborhood.
She was really a sweet neighbor, and our kids were good kids, smart as a whip. They were a nice family.
And now in her 40s, with their daughters approaching their teens, Colette started thinking more seriously about her own career.
She began a nursing or pre-nursing program at the University of Texas at Arlington because she wanted to be a nurse and help people.
She's a very loving person. I think she has a very tender spirit and a tender heart.
But the nursing career never happened. Not long after she started the program, a sudden loss of faith would send this seemingly successful family into crisis. Deep in the Bible Belt, the Dallas suburbs were a welcoming place for devout Christians like Colette and her husband.
We had a neighborhood Bible study, and she belonged to that.
But after a few years in Arlington, Arthur began to turn away from the church.
He was professing total unbelief, and that he had gotten smart, gotten educated, did his own studying, and realized that, in his words, God was a farce.
Colette blamed Arthur's sudden about-face on his teaching career.
When you go and teach in college, there's a mentality that being a born-again Christian, you're out of the norm.
Whatever caused it, Arthur took to his newfound atheism with all the fervor of a recent convert.
He was demeaning people who had beliefs such as Colette.
For Colette, the fact that her husband of 15 years was suddenly making fun of her own deeply held beliefs was bad enough. But the fact that he spent the next few years trying to convince her to renounce religion was even worse.
He wanted Colette to deny God, to deny Christ. And Colette would not do it.
She thought there was always hope that he would come back. She wanted what we might consider the American dream, the 2.5 kids and the husband and the 2 cars in the driveway and everybody sitting at the dinner table together and going to church on Sundays.
But it wasn't to be. Colette may have stood fast in her beliefs, but her daughters were soon backsliding, skipping church on Sundays with their father.
I think she felt like she was being ganged up on.
However, the fact that her daughters had opted out of church along with their father wasn't all that bothered the conservative Colette. The devout mother also worried about her teenage girls as they grew into young women.
She just tried to guide them all the time. She's a very protective mother.
She was also strict, setting many of the same rules her Haitian mother had. Rules her daughters found overly old-fashioned and restrictive, particularly when it came to boys.
They were not going along with her view of morality and religion and going out and seeing boys and all this stuff.
Colette's old-school approach to parenting soon caused friction with her more liberal-minded American-born husband, too.
They were arguing over parental differences and what Colette thought was appropriate and what Arthur said was okay.
This friction, it boiled and boiled and boiled.
At first, most of the heat was focused on the oldest of her 2 daughters, Naomi.
Naomi, she's a young, attractive girl, and she may have been getting some attention from boys, and Colette just couldn't handle that.
But as the arguments over Naomi's upbringing intensified, Arthur took a drastic step.
At 17, he moved her out and got her own apartment.
The move did little to diffuse the tension. With Naomi out of the house, the arguments continued, only this time they were centered on Gabrielle.
They were arguing over how they wanted Gabby to be raised and the different things that Gabby wanted to participate in.
Nobody was getting along with each other.
In fact, things got so bad that in October of 2009, when Gabrielle was 17, she moved out too.
I would describe it as a household in crisis.
And at the end of November, roughly a month after Colette's daughter moved out, the crisis would turn deadly. On Sunday, November 22, 2009, an emergency dispatcher in Arlington, Texas, took a 911 call from a hysterical teenage girl.
My dad's been shot.
The caller was 17-year-old Gabrielle Reyes.
You can hear that she's running. You can hear that she's out of breath. She believes that her mom just shot her dad.
Where's your mom at? I don't know. I ran from the house.
She's running to her friend's house because of the horrific sight that she's just witnessed.
My dad's laying in my garage, and he's on the floor and he's bleeding.
Once at the neighbors, Gabrielle gave her friend's mother the phone so she could speak to the dispatcher.
Is her dad in the garage? That's what she told me earlier. Is that true? Yes. I'm not going over there. She said her mom has a gun.
Arlington police rushed to Gabrielle's home. When they arrived, they found her mother, 50-year-old Colette Reyes, hurrying out the door.
Colette, her sister, and her brother-in-law, they're getting ready to leave. when the police arrived.
Colette wasn't armed, but considering that her daughter had just accused her of shooting her husband, the police were taking no chances.
She's not arrested at that point in time, but she's put in handcuffs and detained.
Colette is then taken by the police, placed into custody, placed in the back seat of a patrol car.
With Colette secured in the back of the squad car, the officers entered the house. And just as Gabrielle had described, they found 45-year-old Arthur Reyes lying on the garage floor in a pool of blood, dead.
He has a single gunshot wound in the right part of his temple.
Near Arthur's body, the police found a Glock 9mm, but there was no sign of a struggle and no indication of why Arthur had been shot. So while Colette was transported to the station for questioning, the police turned to the only other witnesses at the scene, Colette's sister Miriam and her husband.
This is around Thanksgiving time, so they're there visiting.
However, the holiday wasn't the only reason for their visit. Colette's sister told the investigators that Gabrielle wasn't the only member of the household who moved out in October. After nearly 22 years of marriage, Arthur had left Colette too.
All of a sudden, he's leaving. Her world is spinning out of control.
Arthur had got an apartment over by University of Texas at Arlington, and he was staying there with Gabrielle.
And according to her sister, Colette and Arthur were in the process of separating, which was the main reason she had come down for the holiday.
She was there to make sure that Colette could get through this tough time.
When him and Gabby moved out, that was a huge blow to her. You take it personal as a wife, as a mother.
Miriam claimed that the night of the shooting had been particularly tough on Colette. Arthur had come over earlier that night to pack up a few possessions stored in the garage and move them to his new apartment.
This garage, it's attached to the home. So if you open the garage door and went through the back door, you'd be inside the house.
And while Arthur was out in the garage packing, Colette took the opportunity to step through that door and speak to her husband.
The others are still inside the house.
But based on what her sister told the police, Colette's conversation with Arthur hadn't gone well.
My sister said he was cursing at God, cursing at everything.
But according to Colette's sister, Arthur's rant had been cut off abruptly.
There is a bang, one gunshot.
Colette's sister said she had rushed into the garage and found Colette standing over Arthur's body.
Colette just calmly says, "I shot him." And apparently the sister doesn't believe her. And so she says, "What? I shot her."
And according to what Colette told her sister, she'd had no choice.
Colette said he had a gun.
Colette says, "Arthur pulled a weapon on me."
Police had recovered a 9mm Glock pistol from the garage, but that was the only weapon they found there. And there was no indication that it had ever been in Arthur's possession. Clearly, it was time to talk to Colette. But when the investigators sat down in the interrogation room to take her statement, things got off to a bizarre start.
They read her the standard Miranda warnings. You have the right to remain silent, right to a lawyer. Her response is, "I have no rights."
Then Colette started chanting.
She's chanting, "I'm a no good piece of shit."
Rambling on and on.
And if that wasn't enough to unnerve the investigators,
she starts taking her clothes off. They're in the room, so they have to kind of subdue her.
And when they finally did subdue her, there was little the investigators could do but put Colette back in her holding cell.
They're not able to get a statement from her.
Given her state of mind, she's not an appropriate subject to be interviewed.
However, there was one last witness to interview, Colette's daughter, Gabrielle. Questioned that night, Gabrielle confirmed what her aunt had already told the police, that her parents had split up about a month before the shooting.
Arthur and Gabrielle moved out. They moved out in October of 2009.
Although on the night of his death, Arthur Reyes had returned home to pack up his last few things, and Gabrielle had tagged along with her father.
Gabriella has a friend about 2 blocks away, and he drops her off so she can see her friend.
And according to Gabrielle, she'd left her friends at a little after 9, walking towards home after receiving a call from her father.
He calls her on her cell phone and tells her to come over. They were ready to leave.
She said she was about half a block away when she heard the gunshot.
She runs up, she sees her father in a pool of blood in the garage, and she starts running back.
Dialing 911 as she ran.
I think my dad's been shot.
Gabrielle said that while she hadn't personally witnessed what had led up to the shooting, she doubted it was self-defense. Because according to Gabrielle, Colette had plenty of reasons to be angry with her father. And the separation was only the start.
Arthur had met a woman online.
Arthur has gotten with an attorney, and he's had them draw up divorce papers.
In fact, the papers were supposed to be filed that Monday, which was why her father had picked that Sunday to return home for the last of his things.
He wanted to get everything out before that divorce paperwork landed on Colette Reyes' desk.
So which was it? Had Arthur pulled a gun, as Colette claimed? Or was there another possibility? At some point during their confrontation in the garage, had he let slip what was coming, sending Colette into a violent rage? As far as the Arlington police were concerned, it would be up to the courts to decide. That night, they booked Colette into the Tarrant County Jail on murder charges.
At this point in time, it's not a whodunit. It's basically going to come down to a self-defense claim.
By the beginning of December 2009, it had been more than a week since Colette Reyes shot her estranged husband, Arthur, in their Arlington, Texas home.
It was possibly self-defense. Colette says she saw Arthur pull a weapon.
And when the 50-year-old, out on $35,000 bond, spoke to a local TV station about the case, she went even further. In the interview, Colette not only said that Arthur had pulled a gun on her that night, she claimed that he had abused her for years.
Physical, verbal, and psychological and spiritual.
According to Colette, there were even police records to back up her claims, a pair of domestic abuse complaints she'd made against Arthur.
I only called twice because they were outrageous, but I constantly got pushed, got slapped.
It was true. The police had been out to Colette's house. The first incident had occurred 2 years earlier in 2007, when Colette and Arthur were arguing about their daughters.
But on this occasion, it went further than that.
And when the fight turned physical, Colette had called the police.
The police then talked to Arthur there at the house and asked him, basically, did you strike your wife? And he said, yes, I did.
Arthur's admission had earned him a Class C misdemeanor citation.
It's a low-level assault charge under Texas law.
The second incident occurred a month before the shooting, in October of 2009, when Arthur and Gabrielle moved out of the house.
They were trying to leave, and it escalated into a fight.
And on the second occasion, Arthur and Gabrielle had both been charged with misdemeanor assault.
Colette told me that Gabby was hitting her and Arthur was holding her so Gabby could hit her.
Was it possible Colette had acted in self-defense? The paper trail documenting her abuse claims certainly made it sound plausible. But the real proof would rest with some other incredible evidence the investigators uncovered. It was an audio tape, one of many Colette had secretly made of her conversations with Arthur.
Not that unusual for spouses who are about to engage in divorce proceedings to try to record something that the other spouse has said.
To, try to get that gotcha, that aha moment that they can use in court.
And as one of the crime scene investigators was shocked to discover, one of the tapes was from the day of the shooting.
He calls us and he says, "You're not going to believe what's on this tape." It's like the last 36 minutes of Arthur's life.
The recording started not long after Arthur arrived at the house that evening.
I'm going to get my stuff now. Can you please open the garage door?
He is attempting to load up property. He's having a conversation with Colette and her sister Miriam.
The sister's saying, "Arthur, you should get back with Colette."
She didn't cheat or anything. She's been faithful to you, Arthur.
She's been a monster.
Monster.
A monster.
Arthur describes the relationship as 20 years of hell.
Colette is a psycho. Extremely angry, out of control, toddler in a woman's body.
He's being demeaning towards her. He's belittling her.
I mean, I don't see how it makes you listen. I really don't.
Unwilling to hear Colette run down, her sister walked out of the garage. But Colette stayed, listening as Arthur's taunts continued.
What we're going to have is losing that.
It was the last thing Arthur ever said, because the assertion that she had driven her husband and daughters away was apparently more than Colette could stand.
You can hear the little pop and you can hear things falling around.
And seconds later, the noise of the gunshot had brought Colette's sister running back to the garage.
Did you drop something?
I killed him.
Huh?
I just killed him.
Huh?
Colette's sister did not want to believe that it happened.
He had a gun.
Huh?
He had a gun. He had a gun.
Where's the gun?
That leads us to believe that, even the sister questioned the validity of whether or not this was self-defense.
The prosecutors certainly did. Other than Colette's after-the-fact statement, there was nothing on the tape to indicate that Arthur had pulled a gun on her prior to the shooting.
I don't think he ever knew what hit him.
In fact, once they sat down with Colette and tried to build a defense, even her attorneys were having a hard time trying to reconcile Colette's account with what had been captured on the tape.
My question was, did he set a gun down and you picked it up and shot him?
When he would ask her or press her, or when I would ask her or press her, she would say, "I don't remember."
When friends and acquaintances asked what happened to Arthur, Colette's behavior became even more bizarre.
She would say, "Well, people tell me he's dead. I don't know if he is."
Which caused me to think there may be some mental health issues associated with this woman.
Mental health issues that could interfere with her ability to stand trial.
You have to be able to understand the nature of the charges against you. You have to be able to help your counsel mount a credible defense.
And when the defense arranged for a psychologist to evaluate Colette, that's precisely what he found.
The psychologist calls me and says, "Wes, this lady's not competent to stand trial."
In fact, it turned out that Colette had a long history of mental illness. Based on medical records that the defense uncovered, Colette's troubles had begun back when she and Arthur were still living in California.
She had 2 daughters she was trying to rear. Her husband was working on his PhD. She was under pressure.
And in 1994, the pressure had caused her to crack.
Colette had a mental breakdown.
The breakdown began with a strange series of accusations against coworkers at the engineering company where she worked.
She felt like she was being persecuted, that people were trying to do stuff to her.
And what Colette claimed they were trying to do was downright bizarre.
A lot of the accusations that she made involved lesbians at work touching her and trying to give her AIDS.
Colette's odd behavior eventually led to a psychological evaluation and a whole host of diagnoses.
Ranging from bipolar, schizoaffective, schizophrenia, paranoid delusions.
However, despite the alarming number of mental issues she appeared to suffer from, Colette had refused treatment.
She wouldn't go to the hospital. She doesn't take the medication she's supposed to get.
Instead of treatment, Colette had turned to her faith, to the point that by the time the family moved to Arlington, even her religious zeal had started to seem a little unhinged.
She would go to the mall and tell whoever was in the vicinity about the Lord. Small children, she'd walk up and she would quote different scriptures to, obey your parents or you're going to die.
But now that her husband was dead and she was charged with his murder, there was no refusing treatment. In November of 2011, after the defense and prosecution both agreed that Colette wasn't competent to stand trial, the judge ordered that she be admitted to a state mental hospital.
Well, she's there for probably 4 months. They counsel her, medications.
By February of 2012, Colette's condition had improved to the point that she was released.
They treat her, and she's deemed competent to stand trial once again.
However, in August of 2012, with Colette's trial date fast approaching, the defense demanded a new competency hearing. But this time, the prosecution didn't agree. At the hearing in January of 2013, they called in a psychologist who had a very different take on Colette's mental health. Rather than mentally ill, she testified that Colette was faking.
She made the determination that Colette was falsifying symptoms of mental illness in order to gain an advantage in her murder trial.
Said that she's fooled all of you, and that when there's an incentive to be insane, that's when she's at her most insane.
My reaction to that was, well, she's pretty darn good at this. I mean, she was fooling doctors as long ago as 1994 in the state of California.
However, despite her attorney's objections and Colette's long documented history of mental illness, Colette was found competent to stand trial. So more than 3 years after the shooting, it was finally up to a jury to decide whether or not she was guilty of murder. On November 5th, 2013, at the Tarrant County Courthouse in Fort Worth, Texas, Colette Reyes finally stood trial for the murder of her husband, Arthur. The 54-year-old Haitian immigrant had admitted to shooting Arthur on the evening of November 22nd, 2009. But the prosecution and the defense had spent the past 4 years locked in a legal battle over her competency to stand trial.
We have our psychologist saying she's mentally ill and not competent. We have the state psychologist saying she's faking.
The prosecutors had won out in the end. And in their opening statement, the prosecutors claimed that mental illness wasn't all that Colette had been faking. They argued that her claim that she had shot Arthur in self-defense was just as false.
This was a murder without any legal justification or excuse.
In their open, Colette's attorneys backed away from her prior claim of self-defense. Instead, they mounted an insanity defense.
That's different from competency.
Insanity in Texas is, at the time of the event, did you know what you were doing was right or wrong?
A very hard test to meet.
And to make matters worse for Colette, the prosecutor had some very powerful witnesses against her, both of Colette and Arthur's daughters.
You just don't have very many daughters who will come to a murder trial and testify against their mother.
Although according to her daughter's testimony, Colette had been anything but loving.
She frequently told them they were going to hell.
Colette would often refer to Gabrielle as a prostitute.
And contrary to Colette's claims about their father, Gabrielle and Naomi told the jury that their mother was the abusive one.
The daughters never talked about Arthur ever hitting them, being abusive, either physically or verbally. The person that they talked about being abusive was their mom, Colette.
In fact, 24-year-old Naomi told the jury all about one particular incident, the one that finally prompted her to move out of the house.
Naomi is in bed and she's supposed to go to school, and she says she's not going to go to school.
Colette grabs Naomi and drags her out of the house by her hair into the front yard.
And as humiliating as that was, Naomi said that Colette hadn't stopped there. She told the jury that her mother had dragged her out to the curb and dumped her by the garbage cans.
Saying that this is where we leave the trash.
According to the prosecution, the shocking incident spoke volumes about Colette's violent and vindictive nature. But on cross, the defense claimed that the prosecutors were blowing things out of proportion.
They tried to show that Colette was very abusive to her children, which really not. She wanted her children to go to school, graduate from college.
However, another of her daughter's claims would be tougher to counter. 21-year-old Gabrielle testified that she had reason to believe her father's murder had been premeditated. According to Gabrielle, among the things her father had hoped to retrieve on the evening of his death were several handguns.
According to Gabrielle, Arthur had 3 guns in the house.
But she also said that the guns, including the Glock pistol that killed him, had disappeared while Colette was living in the house by herself.
Gabrielle thought that she hid them. That's one of the reasons why she thinks that the murder was premeditated.
As far as why Colette would plot to kill her husband, the prosecutors had a theory.
Colette was very concerned that the divorce was going to affect her financially.
After all, she hadn't really worked in the 10 years since the family moved to Texas.
She depended on Arthur for her roof, her food, her money to do anything. And then all of a sudden he's leaving. So the fear was huge.
In fact, as the prosecutors revealed to the jury, one of the first things Colette had done once out on bail was file a claim against Arthur's life insurance, a policy worth about $250,000. Naturally, since Colette had been charged with Arthur's murder, the insurance company rejected her claim. But she didn't walk away entirely empty-handed.
She had emptied all of the bank accounts. She had emptied the girls' college funds. She was trying to get her hands on every bit of money that she could.
By the time the prosecution rested, they had painted an ugly picture. But when it was the defense's turn, they argued that what seemed cruel and calculating was actually the product of Colette's long history of mental illness.
Defense attorneys were trying to establish that this is a woman who's had problems for a long time, since 1994.
All of our doctors, all of them said clearly she was mentally ill. She was mentally ill when it happened. She's mentally ill now, and she is getting worse.
She has delusions. She's hearing voices, seeing things that aren't real, tries to talk to someone that's not there.
In fact, the defense claimed that all those years of untreated mental illness explained why Colette had shot her husband on the evening of November 22nd, 2009.
She snapped. She lost it, and she killed him.
Even though, according to her sister, all Colette wanted was to save her marriage.
Colette, faithful to God and faithful to her husband and trying to keep the family together and getting abused by her husband. I mean, that would drive a woman crazy.
But was Colette crazy? Her behavior in the courtroom was certainly outrageous.
She would talk over the witnesses,
Chanting and yelling and screaming.
say that she was the chosen one and she would be the one sitting at the right hand of God.
You can't deny the fact that Colette has some problems.
Problems that prevented her from taking the stand, according to the defense.
She would just blurt out things that made no sense. She couldn't control her behavior.
At least that's what the defense claimed. But according to the prosecutor, Colette's bizarre antics were simply a repeat of the performance that had allowed her to put off her trial for 4 years.
It says that this woman used her illness as a tool.
And if it was a tool, Colette made one last attempt to use it during the prosecutor's closing argument.
I was kind of going through how Arthur Reyes was packing up his belongings and Colette just came up and shot him in the head. And at that point, she just stood up and yelled, "Hallelujah."
Even before the jury announced it had reached a verdict on November 13th, 2013, there was no denying that Colette Reyes had fatally shot her husband, Arthur, in their Arlington, Texas home.
We never disputed that she killed her husband.
Instead, the defense had argued that the former biochemical engineer was not guilty due to her mental illness.
Wasn't it enough to totally skew her perception of right or wrong? That was the question before the jury.
And after about 5 hours of deliberations, the jury had an answer.
The jury found her guilty of murder. They rejected the insanity defense.
I wasn't surprised because I could see that they did not listen to the doctors.
However, before the jurors handed down her sentence, they would listen to Colette.
Colette decided that she would testify during the sentencing hearing.
She said to the attorney, she's prayed about it, and the Lord told her to speak.
Although when Colette took the stand, what she wanted to say wasn't exactly clear.
She said some really bizarre, delusional things on the stand. Arthur might be dead, but she can bring him back to life.
She has no idea what's coming out of her mouth. The judge is trying to make it stop. The prosecuting attorney's objecting.
And the defense? They hoped that Colette's crazy rambling would finally convince the jury that she was insane.
I kind of sat there and I thought, well, I rest my case.
But if the defense hoped that Colette's testimony would sway the jury's sentence, they would be disappointed.
She was sentenced to 45 years.
I was surprised in the psychological state that she was in. Thought that maybe the jury would decide to be more lenient.
It was a far different outcome than what the defense hoped she would receive.
We wanted to see Colette go to a hospital, not to prison.
And according to Colette's supporters, the irony is that if she had received treatment earlier, she wouldn't be in prison now.
I think if Colette Reyes had been properly evaluated and treated over the years, Arthur Reyes wouldn't be dead.
On the morning of September 10th, 1983, nothing appeared unusual. In a quiet community of Twielenfleth in northern Germany, the day began the way thousands of others had begun before it. The roads were still calm. The air carried the coolness of an early autumn morning. Most people were only beginning to wake up, preparing for work, family obligations, or the ordinary routines that make up everyday life. For one man, however, that morning would become the final known chapter of his life. At approximately 6:15 a.m., 34-year-old Herbert Kars left his home and set out for work. As a supermarket branch manager in Hamburg, he was accustomed to responsibility and routine. The drive was not extraordinary. It was a journey he had likely made many times before. There was no public indication that he was afraid, that he felt threatened, or that he anticipated danger waiting somewhere along the road ahead. He simply left home, and then he vanished. There are many true crime cases that begin with violence witnessed by others. Some begin with emergency calls, desperate screams, or scenes of chaos. The case of Herbert Kars is different. It begins with silence. A man leaves for work and never arrives. There is no confirmed public account of a struggle. No known eyewitness who saw the moment everything went wrong. No definitive explanation for what happened between the moment he departed and the moment the world realized he was gone. At first, the disappearance may have seemed difficult to understand, but not necessarily impossible. Adults sometimes disappear voluntarily. Unexpected circumstances arise. Cars break down. Plans change. But as hours turned into days, concern grew. Family members knew something was wrong. Herbert Kars was not where he was supposed to be. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to interrupt every aspect of his normal life. Soon, authorities were searching for answers. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the case became. When a person disappears, their absence usually creates a trail of unanswered questions. In Herbert's case, one question stood above all others. Where was he? For weeks, there was no answer. Then another mystery emerged. Witnesses began reporting sightings of Herbert's vehicle, a mustard-yellow Toyota Corolla. The reports came from different locations, including Hamburg and the district of Pinneberg. On the surface, that might sound like a promising lead. After all, if the car was being seen, perhaps Herbert himself was still alive. But there was a problem. Nobody could confirm that Herbert was the person behind the wheel. The reports raised a disturbing possibility. If Herbert had disappeared, and his car was still moving through northern Germany, then someone else may have been using it. Imagine being an investigator confronted with that information. A missing man cannot be found, yet the vehicle associated with him appears repeatedly after his disappearance. Every reported sighting becomes both a clue and a frustration. Each observation suggests movement, activity, and opportunity. Yet none of them answers the most important question. Who was driving the car? Was it the person responsible for Herbert's disappearance? Was it someone connected to that person? Or were the sightings merely fragments of incomplete memories that could never be fully verified? As the weeks passed, uncertainty deepened. For Herbert's family, every day without answers must have carried its own burden. Missing person cases exist in a painful space between hope and fear. Without confirmation of death, there remains the possibility of survival. Without evidence of safety, there remains the possibility of tragedy. Families are often forced to live in both realities at the same time. Somewhere, investigators were trying to reconstruct the final known movements of a man who had seemingly vanished from his ordinary life. Somewhere, a yellow Toyota Corolla continued to appear in witness accounts. Somewhere, the truth existed, but it remained hidden. Then, nearly 3 months after Herbert Carr's disappeared, the case took a devastating turn. On November 29, 1983, a body was discovered in a drainage shaft in Home, within the district of Pinneberg. The body was identified as Herbert Carr's. The uncertainty surrounding his fate was over. The mystery surrounding his death was only beginning. An autopsy established that Herbert had been shot. What had begun as a missing person investigation was now unquestionably a homicide investigation. Authorities were no longer searching for a missing man. They were searching for a killer. Yet, even in death, Herbert left behind more questions than answers. Reports that emerged from the investigation indicated that he had been found bound with a red clothesline. Several personal items were missing. His wallet was gone. His identification documents were gone. Most notably, the key to the safe at the supermarket where he worked had also disappeared. Each missing item added another layer to the puzzle. Were these objects taken simply because the offender wanted them? Were they removed to conceal evidence? Did the missing safe key point toward a financial motive? Or was it merely one piece of a larger story that investigators had yet to uncover? As authorities examined Herbert's life, another unusual detail surfaced. Before his disappearance, he had reportedly withdrawn approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks from his bank account over a period of months. The significance of that money was unclear. What happened to it? Where did it go? Was it connected to the events that led to his death? No definitive answer emerged. And then there was the matter of the car. For months, the Toyota Corolla occupied a strange place within the investigation. Witnesses claimed to have seen it after Herbert disappeared. Yet the vehicle itself remained missing. Until January 31st, 1984. On that day, Herbert Carr's Toyota Corolla was recovered from the Elbe River. The discovery suggested that someone had deliberately disposed of it. Cars did not simply find their way to the bottom of a river. Whether the vehicle had been abandoned to destroy evidence, conceal connections, or erase traces of a crime, investigators recognized its significance immediately. Yet once again, the discovery generated more questions than answers. The body had been hidden. The vehicle had been hidden. Important personal items had vanished. A workplace safe key was missing. A substantial amount of money remained unexplained. And despite all of these clues, no one could identify the person responsible. Years passed, then decades. Witnesses aged, memories faded. Evidence that might once have spoken clearly grew quieter with time. What had once been an active murder investigation gradually became something investigators dread. A cold case. But cold cases possess a unique power. They refuse to disappear completely. They remain suspended between past and present, waiting for a forgotten detail, a new witness, or a single piece of information capable of changing everything. The murder of Herbert Carrs became one of northern Germany's enduring mysteries. More than 40 years after he left home for work on that September morning, the central question remains unanswered. Who killed Herbert Carrs? The answer may exist in a memory someone never shared. It may exist in a conversation long forgotten. It may exist in facts investigators have not yet connected. Or it may rest with individuals who have carried the truth in silence for decades. What is certain is this: a 34-year-old husband left his home at 6:15 a.m. on September 10th, 1983. He never reached his destination. Nearly 3 months later, he was found dead. His killer was never identified. His family never received a courtroom verdict. And one of Germany's most haunting unsolved murder cases was born. This is the story of Herbert Kars, a story of disappearance, murder, unanswered questions, and a mystery that has survived for more than 4 decades. Before a murder becomes a case file, before investigators begin assembling timelines and examining evidence, before theories emerge and headlines appear, there is always a person at the center of the story. In unsolved cases especially, that person can sometimes become overshadowed by the mystery itself. Questions about suspects, motives, and missing evidence often dominate the narrative. Yet long before Herbert Kars became the subject of a homicide investigation, he was simply a man living an ordinary life in northern Germany. Understanding who he was and the world he inhabited is essential to understanding why his disappearance would leave behind so many unanswered questions. In 1983, Herbert Kars was 34 years old. He was married and lived in the community of Tweilenfleth, located in the Stade region of northern Germany. By all publicly available accounts contained within the case record, he was a working professional with significant responsibilities. He served as a supermarket branch manager in Hamburg, a position that required trust, accountability, and daily oversight of business operations. While many details of his private life remain unknown to the public, the basic outline is clear. He was a husband, an employee, and a man whose life followed a recognizable structure. He had obligations. He had routines. He had a destination each morning. That routine would become one of the most important elements of the investigation after his disappearance. To understand the setting of this case, it is helpful to imagine northern Germany in the early 1980s. The region connected communities both rural and urban, with people commuting between smaller towns and larger commercial centers. Tweilenfleth, where Herbert lived, was situated within the broader Stade district, while Hamburg stood as one of Germany's most important cities and economic hubs. For many residents of surrounding communities, travel to Hamburg for work was a normal part of daily life. Roads linked towns and cities together in predictable patterns. Commuters departed early, arrived at work, completed their shifts, and returned home in the evening. It was a rhythm repeated day after day. Herbert Kars was one of those commuters. Every routine creates expectations. Families expect loved ones to return home. Employers expect workers to arrive at scheduled times. Friends expect calls to be returned and appointments to be honored. These expectations become so normal that they are often invisible until they are broken. In Herbert's case, the entire mystery began when that routine suddenly collapsed. As a supermarket branch manager, Herbert occupied a position of responsibility. Although many details of his specific duties have not been publicly disclosed, one fact became especially important after his death. He possessed access to the key for the safe at the supermarket where he worked. At first glance, this might appear to be a minor administrative detail. In hindsight, investigators viewed it differently. The safe key would later become one of several items that disappeared along with Herbert. Its absence would generate questions that remained unresolved for decades. The significance of responsibility is often underestimated when examining criminal cases. Individuals entrusted with money, assets, or access frequently become connected to investigative theories, even when evidence remains incomplete. In Herbert's case, investigators would eventually find themselves examining not only the circumstances of his death, but also aspects of his financial history. Those discoveries would add another layer of uncertainty to an already baffling investigation. Yet before discussing those mysteries, it is worth returning to the final period of Herbert's known life. What did September of 1983 look like from his perspective? The truth is that much remains unknown. There is no publicly documented account describing his thoughts during those final days. There is no confirmed statement revealing concerns, fears, or suspicions. There is no verified evidence indicating that he expected danger. The available information instead paints a picture of normalcy. He continued to work. He continued to live with his family. He continued to follow the routines associated with his profession and daily life. This apparent normality makes the case particularly unsettling. Many homicide investigations contain obvious warning signs visible only in retrospect. There may be escalating conflicts, documented threats, public disputes, or known criminal associations. In the available information concerning Herbert Cars, no such warning signs have been publicly established. Instead, the case presents investigators with a troubling contradiction. A man appears to be living an ordinary life. Yet circumstances eventually reveal that something extraordinary was occurring beneath the surface. One of the most intriguing details discovered during the investigation involved Herbert's finances. Authorities learned that, in the months leading up to his disappearance, approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks had been withdrawn from his bank account. The withdrawals occurred over time rather than in a single transaction. This fact immediately raised questions. 30,000 Deutsche Marks represented a substantial amount of money. Investigators naturally wanted to know where it had gone and why it had been withdrawn. The problem was that no clear answer emerged. Even decades later, this financial detail remains one of the most frequently discussed aspects of the case. It is important to emphasize what is known and what is not known. What is known is that the money had reportedly been withdrawn. What is not known is exactly how it was used or whether it was connected to the murder. The distinction matters. In true crime investigations, unanswered questions often become breeding grounds for speculation. Yet speculation cannot replace evidence. The withdrawals existed as a documented mystery, not a documented motive. Still, investigators could not ignore them. Whenever a homicide investigation includes unexplained financial activity, authorities must consider the possibility that money played some role in the events leading to the crime. Whether the connection is direct or indirect, whether it proves significant or ultimately meaningless, financial records often become crucial pieces of the puzzle. In Herbert's case, the unexplained withdrawals would remain one of several loose threads that investigators could never fully tie together. The geography of the region would also become important. Tweelenfleth, Hamburg, Home, Pinneberg, and eventually the Elbe River would all appear in the chronology of the investigation. These locations formed a broad map stretching across northern Germany. Initially, they represented ordinary places connected by roads and daily travel. After Herbert's disappearance, they became markers in a homicide investigation. His home was in Tweelenfleth. His workplace was in Hamburg. His body would later be found in Home within the district of Pinneberg. His vehicle would eventually be recovered from the Elbe River. Each location contributed a fragment of the story. None provided a complete explanation. As investigators attempted to understand Herbert's final movements, they faced a challenge familiar to many cold case detectives. They were trying to reconstruct a sequence of events that no longer existed. The further they moved from September 10th, 1983, the more difficult that task became. Memories fade quickly. Small details disappear. Witnesses struggle to distinguish one ordinary day from another. Every unanswered question becomes harder to solve as time passes. Yet at the center of all those questions remain the same individual, Herbert Cars. Not a mystery, not a headline, not merely a victim. A 34-year-old husband whose life ended under circumstances that have never been fully explained. When listeners encounter unsolved cases, it is easy to focus entirely on the puzzle. We search for suspects. We examine clues. We compare theories. But before the investigation began, before the body was discovered, Before the vehicle was found beneath the waters of the Elbe, there was a man following what appeared to be a normal path through life. The tragedy of the case lies not only in the unanswered questions, but also in the abrupt destruction of that normalcy. Nothing in the public record suggests that September 10th, 1983, was supposed to be different from any other working day. Herbert Carrs left home expecting to travel to Hamburg. He had responsibilities waiting for him. He had a workplace expecting his arrival. He had family members who anticipated seeing him again. Instead, that morning became the dividing line between the life he had known and a mystery that would endure for more than 4 decades. The story of Herbert Carrs is often remembered because it remains unsolved. Yet before examining the disappearance itself, it is important to remember what was lost. A husband vanished. A family was left without answers. A community was confronted with a crime it could not explain. And somewhere between Tweilenfleth and Hamburg, along a route that should have been entirely routine, the final known chapter of Herbert Carrs' life quietly began to unfold. Every unsolved murder contains a moment that investigators spend years trying to reconstruct. It is the point where an ordinary day transforms into a criminal mystery. Sometimes that moment is captured on surveillance footage. Sometimes it is witnessed by bystanders. Sometimes it is documented through phone records, messages, or eyewitness accounts. In the case of Herbert Carrs, the crucial moment exists behind a veil of uncertainty. Investigators know when the story began. They know where it ended. But what happened in between remains one of the central mysteries of the entire case. The known timeline begins during the early morning hours of September 10th, 1983. At approximately 6:15 a.m., Herbert Carrs left his home in Tweilenfleth. Like countless other mornings, he was heading to work in Hamburg. Nothing in the available evidence suggests that the departure was unusual. There were no public reports of distress, no confirmed indication that he feared for his safety, no evidence that he expected the journey ahead to be any different from those that had come before. Yet somewhere after leaving home, something happened. What investigators know with certainty is that Herbert never arrived at his destination. At first, the significance of that fact may not have been immediately obvious. Delays happen. Unexpected circumstances arise. A person can be late for any number of reasons. But as time passed and communication failed to arrive, concern grew. The absence could no longer be explained by ordinary inconvenience. For Herbert's family, uncertainty quickly became the defining reality. A husband who should have arrived at work had disappeared. A man whose daily routine followed a predictable pattern was suddenly unreachable. Every hour that passed without contact increased the seriousness of the situation. Soon, authorities were informed. What followed was the beginning of a missing person investigation that would eventually become one of northern Germany's most enduring cold cases. At this stage, investigators were working with very little information. They knew Herbert had left home. They knew he was expected elsewhere. They knew he had failed to arrive. Beyond those facts, almost everything remained unknown. Had he suffered an accident? Had he chosen to leave voluntarily? Had he encountered criminal activity? The possibilities were numerous, and at that point, no single explanation clearly stood above the others. As investigators searched for answers, they focused on the most immediate objective: locating Herbert and locating his vehicle. The vehicle was distinctive enough to attract attention. Herbert drove a mustard-yellow Toyota Corolla. In an investigation where direct evidence was scarce, any sighting of the vehicle carried potential significance. Authorities depended heavily on information provided by members of the public, hoping that someone might have noticed something unusual. Then the reports began to arrive. Witnesses claimed to have seen the Toyota Corolla after Herbert's disappearance. Some sightings reportedly occurred in Hamburg. Others occurred within the district of Pinneberg. For investigators, These reports introduced a new and troubling dimension to the case. If the sightings were accurate, they suggested that the vehicle remained in use after Herbert vanished. That possibility immediately generated a series of difficult questions. Who was driving the car? Was Herbert still alive at the time of those sightings? Or had someone else taken possession of the vehicle? The answers remained elusive. Witness reports are often valuable, but they can also create challenges. Human memory is imperfect. People may accurately remember seeing a vehicle while being unable to identify the driver. Investigators, therefore, had to treat each report carefully. The sightings could not be ignored. Yet neither could they be accepted as definitive proof of any specific conclusion. Still, the pattern was impossible to overlook. The vehicle appeared to remain active while its owner remained missing. That contradiction became one of the most perplexing features of the investigation. As days turned into weeks, the absence of concrete answers became increasingly concerning. Every unsuccessful search increased the likelihood that Herbert had become the victim of a serious crime. Yet without a body, without a confirmed crime scene, and without a suspect, investigators remained trapped in a landscape of uncertainty. Then, nearly 3 months after Herbert disappeared, the investigation reached a devastating turning point. On November 29, 1983, a body was discovered in a drainage shaft located in Home, within the district of Pinneberg. The discovery transformed the case instantly. The search for a missing man became a homicide investigation. Authorities identified the deceased as Herbert Cars. For his family, the discovery ended one form of uncertainty while creating another. The question of whether Herbert was alive had been answered. The question of how he died and who was responsible had not. An autopsy established a critical fact. Herbert Cars had been shot. This finding eliminated any remaining possibility that his death resulted from accident or natural causes. Investigators were dealing with a deliberate act of violence. The murder investigation now intensified. Yet even as authorities examined the circumstances surrounding the discovery, they encountered new mysteries. Reports later associated with the investigation indicated that Herbert's body had been found bound with a red clothesline. Whether viewed as evidence of restraint, control, or concealment, the detail added another disturbing element to the case. It suggested actions taken before or after death that investigators needed to understand. At the same time, authorities noted that several important items were missing. His wallet was gone. His identification documents were gone. Most significantly, the key to the safe at the supermarket where he worked was gone as well. Each missing item became an investigative focal point. The absence of a wallet naturally raised the possibility of robbery. Financial crimes often involve theft of personal belongings, and investigators had to consider whether Herbert had been targeted for that reason. The missing identification documents introduced another possibility. In some homicide cases, offenders remove identifying materials in an effort to delay recognition of the victim. Whether that was the motive here remained unknown, but investigators could not dismiss the possibility. Then there was the missing safe key. Of all the items that vanished alongside Herbert, this detail attracted particular attention. The safe key connected the crime to Herbert's professional life. It was not merely a personal possession. It represented access. It represented responsibility. It represented a possible motive that extended beyond simple theft. Did someone want the key? Was obtaining it part of a larger plan? Or was its disappearance merely coincidental? The investigation could not provide definitive answers. Yet the questions continued to accumulate. The discovery of Herbert's body solved only one part of the mystery. It confirmed that he had been murdered. It did not explain where the murder occurred. It did not reveal who committed it. It did not identify the sequence of events that led from his departure on September 10th to the discovery of his remains nearly 3 months later. Investigators found themselves attempting to bridge a vast gap in the timeline. Somewhere within that gap existed the truth. Somewhere within that gap existed the identity of the person or persons responsible. But the available evidence remained frustratingly incomplete. The vehicle sightings became even more important after the discovery of the body. If Herbert had been murdered relatively early in the timeline, then whoever was seen using the Toyota Corolla afterward may have been directly connected to the crime. Every reported sighting, therefore, acquired greater significance. Investigators needed to understand not only where the vehicle had traveled, but also who had access to it. Yet no clear breakthrough emerged. The case continued to resist resolution. Months later, another significant discovery would occur. On January 31st, 1984, Herbert's Toyota Corolla was recovered from the Elbe River. The finding was important for several reasons. First, it confirmed that the vehicle had not simply disappeared. Someone had apparently taken deliberate action to dispose of it. Second, the location suggested an attempt to conceal or destroy evidence. Vehicles often contain traces of activity, movement, and human contact. By placing the car beneath the waters of a river, whoever was responsible may have hoped to ensure that those traces would never be recovered. Third, the recovery reinforced the impression that Herbert's murder involved more than a spontaneous act of violence. The concealment of a body, the disappearance of personal belongings, the missing safe key, the unexplained vehicle sightings, and finally the disposal of the car all pointed toward a sequence of actions extending beyond the initial crime itself. Yet even this discovery failed to identify a suspect. The investigation moved forward, but certainty remained out of reach. By the beginning of 1984, authorities possessed several important facts. Herbert Carrs had left home on September 10, 1983. He never arrived at work. Witnesses later reported seeing his vehicle. His body was discovered in a drainage shaft in home. He had been shot. Important possessions were missing. His vehicle was eventually recovered from the Elbe River. These facts formed the foundation of the case. What they did not provide was a solution. The events between Herbert's departure and the discovery of his body remained hidden. The identity of the killer remained unknown. The motive remained uncertain. And as investigators continued searching for answers, the murder of Herbert Carrs began its long transformation from an active homicide investigation into one of Germany's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Once investigators confirmed that Herbert Carrs had been murdered, the focus of the case shifted dramatically. The question was no longer whether something terrible had happened. The question was who had done it, why they had done it, and whether enough evidence existed to identify and prosecute those responsible. Unfortunately, the murder investigation quickly encountered a problem that would haunt the case for decades. There were clues, but there was no clear narrative connecting them. Each piece of evidence seemed important. Each discovery suggested a possible direction. Yet none of them led investigators directly to a suspect. Instead, the case became a complex puzzle in which every answer appeared to generate even more questions. The first challenge involved reconstructing Herbert's movements after he left home on the morning of September 10, 1983. Investigators knew where the timeline began. They knew that he departed from Tweelenfleth at approximately 6:15 a.m. They also knew where the timeline effectively ended, with the discovery of his body and home nearly 3 months later. What they lacked was a reliable account of everything that occurred in between. In homicide investigations, establishing a timeline is often one of the most important tasks. Investigators seek to determine where the victim traveled, whom they met, what actions they took, and when critical events occurred. In Herbert's case, this effort proved exceptionally difficult. There were no publicly documented eyewitnesses who observed the crime itself. No confirmed account existed describing a confrontation, an abduction, or the precise location where the fatal shooting took place. The most significant information available came from reports involving Herbert's vehicle. The mustard yellow Toyota Corolla became one of the central pieces of the investigation. Witnesses reported seeing the vehicle after Herbert disappeared. These sightings occurred in different locations, including Hamburg and the district of Pinneberg. At first glance, such reports might appear highly valuable. Vehicles are often easier to identify than individuals. A distinctive car can provide a timeline, reveal travel patterns, and connect suspects to specific locations. But witness sightings also present challenges. Investigators had to determine whether the reports were accurate. Human memory can be surprisingly unreliable, particularly when people are asked to recall events that seemed ordinary at the time they occurred. Someone might remember seeing a yellow vehicle without being able to identify the driver. Another person might accurately recall the location but misremember the date. Investigators therefore faced the difficult task of evaluating numerous observations while trying to separate certainty from assumption. Even if every sighting were accurate, another obstacle remained. Nobody could definitively identify who was driving the vehicle. This limitation was crucial. If Herbert himself had been driving the car, then some sightings could suggest that he remained alive beyond certain points in the timeline. If someone else had been driving it, the sightings might point toward a suspect or an accomplice. Without confirmation of the driver's identity, investigators were left with information that was potentially significant but frustratingly incomplete. The vehicle, therefore, occupied a strange position within the investigation. It appeared to move through the region after Herbert vanished. It did not reveal who was responsible for that movement. As investigators analyzed the vehicle reports, they also turned their attention to the items missing from Herbert's body. The disappearance of personal property is common in criminal investigations, but the specific items missing in this case raised important questions. Herbert's wallet was gone. His identification documents were gone. The key to the supermarket safe was gone. Each missing item suggested a different possible motive. The missing wallet naturally raised the possibility of robbery. Financially motivated crimes are among the most common forms of criminal violence. If robbery had been the primary objective, the absence of the wallet would fit that explanation. Yet investigators could not stop there. The missing identification documents introduced another possibility. In some homicide cases, offenders remove identification to delay the victim's recognition. Such actions can buy time, complicate investigations, and create confusion regarding the victim's identity. Whether that occurred in Herbert's case remained uncertain, but investigators had to consider the possibility. The most intriguing item, however, was undoubtedly the missing safe key. Unlike a wallet or personal identification, the safe key connected directly to Herbert's professional responsibilities. It represented access to something valuable. Its disappearance immediately attracted investigative attention because it suggested a possible link between the murder and Herbert's workplace. Yet even this clue resisted easy interpretation. Investigators could not conclusively determine whether the safe key had been the objective of the crime or whether its disappearance was simply one element of a larger sequence of events. The distinction mattered enormously. If the key had been the objective, then the murder might have been planned around obtaining it. If not, then investigators risked assigning significance to something that merely happened to be missing. This uncertainty would become a recurring theme throughout the case. Almost every major clue appeared capable of supporting multiple interpretations. Then there was the issue of money. As authorities examined Herbert's background, they discovered a detail that immediately captured their attention. Over a period of months before his disappearance, approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks had reportedly been withdrawn from his bank account. The figure was substantial. Investigators naturally wanted answers. Why had the money been withdrawn? Where had it gone? Who knew about it? Was it connected to Herbert's disappearance? Unfortunately, the available evidence did not provide definitive explanations. Financial activity can be an important investigative tool because money often leaves records. Transactions create traces. Withdrawals establish timelines. Expenditures can reveal motives and relationships. Yet in Herbert's case, the withdrawals generated more questions than solutions. Investigators could establish that the money had been withdrawn. What they could not establish with certainty was what ultimately happened to it. This mystery became one of the most discussed aspects of the case. The possibility of a financial motive could not be ignored. Money has historically played a role in countless criminal investigations. Debts, theft, disputes, and financial pressures have all served as motives in homicide cases. Yet without evidence directly connecting the withdrawals to Herbert's murder, investigators could not move beyond theory. And so another potential lead remained unresolved. Months after the discovery of Herbert's body, investigators received another important development. On January 31st, 1984, the Toyota Corolla was recovered from the Elbe River. The discovery immediately attracted attention because it suggested deliberate concealment. Cars do not normally end up at the bottom of a river by accident, particularly when they belong to a homicide victim. The location strongly implied that someone had intentionally disposed of the vehicle. From an investigative perspective, the implications were significant. If the vehicle had been deliberately submerged, then whoever placed it there may have hoped to eliminate evidence. Vehicles can contain fingerprints, fibers, biological traces, and countless other forms of forensic material. Destroying or concealing a vehicle is often an attempt to break the chain of evidence connecting a suspect to a crime. The recovery therefore strengthened investigators' belief that the actions surrounding Herbert's death involved planning and post-crime concealment. Yet even this discovery failed to produce the breakthrough authorities desperately needed. The vehicle's recovery did not reveal the identity of the killer. It did not establish a motive. It did not explain what happened on September 10th. The investigation, therefore, entered a frustrating phase familiar to many homicide detectives. Authorities possessed evidence that clearly suggested criminal behavior, but they lacked the evidence necessary to identify the individual responsible. As years passed, investigators continued evaluating possible theories. One theory focused on financial motives. The unexplained withdrawals of approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks naturally invited scrutiny. Investigators had to consider whether money played a role in the events leading to Herbert's death. Another theory centered on robbery. The disappearance of the wallet and other personal property could support that interpretation. A third theory involved the possibility that Herbert knew the person responsible. Investigators recognized that whoever carried out the crime appeared capable of navigating Herbert's routines and movements. The offender may have known aspects of his daily schedule. However, no evidence publicly established such a relationship with certainty. A fourth theory considered the possibility that multiple individuals were involved. This idea emerged partly from the complexity of the case itself. Herbert disappeared. His body was concealed. His vehicle remained in circulation according to witness reports. Eventually, the car was disposed of in the Elbe River. Some investigators believed that such actions might have required assistance from more than one person. Yet this remained only a theory. No definitive evidence proved that multiple offenders participated. Each theory addressed certain elements of the case. None explained everything. This is one of the defining characteristics of enduring cold cases. The available evidence often supports several plausible scenarios while conclusively proving none of them. Investigators become trapped between competing possibilities, each containing strengths and weaknesses. Progress slows, leads dry up, witness memories fade, physical evidence deteriorates. Over time, the murder of Herbert Carrs became exactly that kind of case. The investigation remained active, but answers remained elusive. The victim had been identified. The manner of death had been established. Important evidence had been collected. Yet the most important question of all remained unanswered. Who killed Herbert Carrs? Years became decades. The mystery endured. And despite the efforts of investigators to follow every lead, analyze every clue, and examine every theory, the case continued to resist resolution, gradually earning its place among Germany's most haunting unsolved murders. In many true crime stories, the investigation eventually reaches a courtroom. Detectives identify a suspect, prosecutors build a case, witnesses testify, and a judge or jury delivers a verdict. The path from crime to conviction is rarely simple, but it provides a form of resolution. Even when questions remain, the legal process offers an official conclusion. The case of Herbert Carrs followed a different path. Despite years of investigative effort, despite the discovery of a body, despite evidence suggesting homicide and concealment, the investigation never reached the stage where a suspect stood trial. There would be no courtroom testimony. There would be no cross-examination of witnesses. There would be no verdict. Instead, the outcome of the case became defined by something far more difficult to accept: uncertainty. By the time investigators had recovered Herbert's body and later located his vehicle in the Elbe River, they had established several important facts. They knew that Herbert had disappeared on September 10th, 1983. They knew that he had been shot. They knew that his body had been concealed in a drainage shaft and home. They knew that personal belongings, including his wallet, identification documents, and workplace safe key, were missing. They knew that witnesses had reported seeing his Toyota Corolla after he vanished. They knew that the vehicle had eventually been disposed of in the river. Yet knowing these facts was not the same as solving the crime. The central challenge remained unchanged. No suspect could be identified with sufficient certainty. No sequence of evidence connected a specific individual to every element of the crime. No definitive motive could be established. Without those critical components, the case remained open but unresolved. As the months following the murder turned into years, investigators continued pursuing available leads. Every reported sighting of the vehicle was examined. Every unexplained detail was reviewed. Every theory was weighed against the evidence. But homicide investigations often depend upon a breakthrough, an overlooked witness, a confession, a forensic discovery, or a mistake made by the offender. In Herbert's case, that breakthrough never arrived. The passage of time created additional difficulties. One of the greatest enemies of any criminal investigation is delay. Memories fade. Documents disappear. Witnesses move away or pass on. Details that once seemed insignificant become impossible to verify years later, even when investigators remain committed to a case. The practical realities of time gradually reduce the amount of information available to them. For Herbert's family, the years must have brought a different kind of challenge. Unlike families whose cases result in convictions, they were left without definitive answers. They knew Herbert had been murdered. They knew someone was responsible, but they did not know who. The uncertainty that began with his disappearance evolved into a different form of uncertainty, one centered not on what had happened to him, but on why it happened and who had done it. As the investigation continued without resolution, the murder of Herbert Carrs slowly entered the category known throughout law enforcement as a cold case. The term itself can sound clinical, but its meaning is profound. A cold case is not a case that investigators have forgotten. It is a case that remains unsolved despite substantial effort. The evidence still exists. The questions remain important. The desire for justice continues. What changes is the pace of progress. New leads become rare. Investigative activity slows. The case enters a state of suspension, waiting for something new to emerge. For decades, Herbert's murder remained in that state. The unanswered questions endured. Who had been driving the Toyota Corolla after his disappearance? Why had the vehicle remained visible before eventually being dumped in the Elbe River? What role, if any, did the missing safe key play? What happened to the approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks withdrawn before Herbert vanished? Were the answers connected to one another? Or were investigators dealing with several unrelated mysteries that happened to intersect? No definitive conclusions emerged. Yet despite the passage of nearly 40 years, authorities refused to abandon the possibility that the case could still be solved. This determination led to one of the most significant developments in the modern history of the investigation. In 2021, the case was featured on the German television program Aktenzeichen XY Ungelöst. For those unfamiliar with the program, its purpose is straightforward but powerful. It presents unsolved crimes to the public in the hope that viewers may provide information capable of advancing investigations. The format recognizes an important reality of criminal justice. Sometimes the missing piece of a case exists not in a laboratory or an evidence locker, but in the memory of an ordinary person. By bringing Herbert Carr's murder back into public view, investigators hoped to accomplish several objectives. First, they wanted to reach individuals who may have known something in 1983 but never came forward. Second, they wanted to encourage witnesses whose memories might have become clearer over time. Third, they wanted to remind the public that the case remained active and that justice had not been abandoned. The decision to revisit a decades-old homicide reflects a remarkable degree of persistence. Many unsolved cases disappear from public attention entirely. Herbert's case did not. Investigators continued to believe that answers might still exist. The response to the broadcast suggested that this belief was justified. Following the program's airing, authorities reportedly received more than 40 new tips. For a case approaching 4 decades in age, that number was significant. Each tip represented a possibility. Perhaps someone remembered a conversation. Perhaps someone connected a long-forgotten detail to the case. Perhaps someone finally felt ready to speak. Not every lead would prove useful, of course. Investigators understand that public appeals often generate information of varying quality. Some tips lead nowhere. Some repeat facts already known. Others contain misunderstandings or inaccuracies. Yet among the information received after the broadcast, authorities reportedly considered some leads promising. That fact alone demonstrates why cold case investigations continue long after many people assume they're finished. Human memory is unpredictable. Information that appears insignificant at one point in time can become highly important years later, when viewed within a broader context. To further encourage cooperation, police in Schleswig-Holstein offered a reward of 6,000 euros for information leading to the identification of the perpetrator. The reward served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, it provided an incentive for individuals possessing information to come forward. Symbolically, it communicated something equally important. The case still mattered. Herbert Carr's had not been forgotten. His murder remained unsolved, but it remained a priority. Even so, the renewed attention did not produce the outcome that many hoped for. No suspect was publicly identified. No arrest was announced. No prosecution followed. The investigation gained new information, but the fundamental mystery remained intact. This absence of resolution is perhaps the defining feature of the case. When discussing criminal investigations, people often imagine that enough time and enough effort will inevitably produce answers. Reality is more complicated. Some cases are solved within hours. Others require years. A small number resist solution entirely, not because investigators lack determination, but because critical pieces of evidence never emerge. The murder of Herbert Carrs belongs to that difficult category. The evidence establishes that a crime occurred. The evidence suggests deliberate actions taken after the crime, including concealment of the body and disposal of the vehicle. The evidence raises questions about money, missing property, and access to a workplace safe. Yet the evidence has never been sufficient to transform suspicion into proof. That distinction matters. In criminal investigations, theories can guide inquiry, but they cannot replace evidence. Detectives may believe a motive is likely. They may suspect certain scenarios. They may identify patterns that seem persuasive. But without proof capable of surviving legal scrutiny, a case cannot proceed to conviction. As a result, the official outcome of the Herbert Carrs investigation remains remarkably brief despite decades of effort. There was a murder. There was an investigation. There were numerous theories. There were renewed appeals for information. There were new leads. But there was no arrest, no trial, and no verdict. More than 40 years after Herbert Carrs left home on what should have been an ordinary workday, the identity of his killer remains unknown. The investigation continues to exist in a state suspended between past and present, carrying the possibility that one future discovery could finally provide the answers that have remained hidden since 1983. For now, however, the outcome of the case is not resolution. It is endurance. The endurance of unanswered questions. The endurance of an unfinished investigation. And the endurance of a mystery that has outlived generations, continuing to challenge investigators long after the events themselves have faded into history. Every unsolved murder leaves behind two separate stories. The first is the story investigators try to reconstruct, the sequence of events that led to a person's death. The second is the story that unfolds afterward in the years and decades that follow. It is the story of those left behind. It is the story of unanswered questions. It is the story of a case that remains open long after the crime itself has passed into history. In the case of Herbert Carrs, that second story has now lasted for more than 4 decades. When discussing unsolved crimes, it is easy to become absorbed by the mystery. We examine evidence. We compare theories. We search for overlooked clues. We ask who might have been responsible and why. Yet behind every cold case is a victim whose life was interrupted and a family forced to continue, living without certainty. That reality is perhaps the most enduring consequence of Herbert Carrs' murder. On September 10th, 1983, Herbert left home expecting to go to work. He was 34 years old. He was married. He had responsibilities waiting for him in Hamburg. Like millions of people beginning an ordinary workday, he likely expected that evening to arrive just like any other. Instead, his journey ended in a manner nobody around him could have anticipated. The discovery of his body on November 29th, 1983 answered one terrible question. Herbert was no longer missing, but it also created another question that would remain unresolved for decades. Why had this happened? For investigators, the search for that answer became a professional challenge. For family members, however, it became something far more personal. There is a unique burden associated with unsolved homicide cases. Families of murder victims often describe grief as a process of learning to live with loss. Families of victims in unsolved cases face an additional challenge. They must also live with uncertainty. The person responsible has never been identified. The circumstances remain unclear. There is no courtroom testimony explaining what happened. There is no verdict capable of providing even a partial sense of closure. Instead, there is silence. In many ways, cold cases become frozen in time. The victim grows older only in photographs. Investigators retire. Witnesses age. Entire generations pass. Yet the questions remain exactly as they were on the day the crime occurred. Who was responsible? Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? Might someone still know the truth? The murder of Herbert Carrs demonstrates how difficult those questions can be to answer. Over the decades, several mysteries have continued to define the case. The first and most obvious mystery concerns the identity of the killer. Despite years of investigation, no individual has been publicly identified as the person responsible for Herbert's death. Investigators established that he had been shot. They established that his body had been concealed. They gathered evidence suggesting deliberate actions after the murder. Yet the person at the center of those actions remains unknown. This absence of an identifiable offender is what transforms a homicide investigation into a true cold case. A crime can be understood in many respects and still remain unsolved if the individual responsible cannot be proven beyond doubt. The second enduring mystery involves the approximately 30,000 Deutsche marks reportedly withdrawn by Herbert before his disappearance. Money often occupies a central role in criminal investigations because financial activity can reveal motives, relationships, and opportunities. In this case, however, the withdrawals created uncertainty rather than clarity. Where did the money go? What was it intended for? Who knew about it? Did it have anything to do with the events of September 1983? The available evidence has never provided definitive answers. As a result, the financial aspect of the case remains one of its most intriguing unresolved elements. The third mystery concerns the missing safe key. Of all the personal items that disappeared, the safe key stands apart because it connected directly to Herbert's professional responsibilities. Investigators naturally considered whether its disappearance might indicate a motive connected to his workplace. Yet once again, certainty proved impossible. Was the key important because someone wanted access to what it protected? Was it removed merely because it happened to be in Herbert's possession? Did it play a central role in the crime, or no role at all? The passage of time has not produced clear answers. Another mystery involves the Toyota Corolla. Witnesses reportedly saw the vehicle after Herbert vanished. Those sightings remain among the most puzzling aspects of the investigation. If the reports were accurate, someone continued using the vehicle after Herbert disappeared. Eventually, the car was recovered from the Elbe River, suggesting deliberate disposal. This raises a series of questions that remain unanswered. Who was driving the vehicle? Why was it kept in use rather than abandoned immediately? Why was it eventually placed in the river? Was the decision motivated by a desire to destroy evidence? Or did the vehicle serve some purpose after Herbert's disappearance before becoming a liability? Investigators explored these possibilities, but no definitive explanation emerged. Perhaps the most frustrating aspect of the case is that each mystery appears connected to the others, while simultaneously resisting explanation. The missing money, the missing safe key, the missing wallet, the missing identification documents, the vehicle sightings, the concealed body, the submerged car. Taken together, these details create the impression of a story that should be understandable. They seem like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Yet after more than 40 years, the complete picture remains elusive. That reality highlights one of the most important lessons of criminal investigation. Evidence does not always produce certainty. Popular culture often portrays investigations as a linear process in which clues inevitably lead to solutions. Real life is different. Evidence may be incomplete. Witnesses may misremember events. critical information may never be discovered. Even highly experienced investigators sometimes encounter cases that refuse to yield their secrets. The murder of Herbert Carrs serves as a reminder of that limitation. It is also a reminder of the importance of persistence. The decision to revisit the case in 2021 through Aktenzichen XY Ungelast demonstrated that investigators had not given up. More than 40 new tips reportedly followed the broadcast. Some were considered promising. Although those leads did not immediately solve the case, they reinforced an important truth. Time does not always eliminate the possibility of justice. History contains numerous examples of cold cases solved decades after the original crime. Sometimes a witness finally speaks. Sometimes a forgotten document is rediscovered. Sometimes a detail that once appeared insignificant suddenly becomes meaningful when viewed from a new perspective. For that reason, investigators continue pursuing information even when a case appears dormant. The possibility of answers remains. The possibility of accountability remains. The possibility that someone, somewhere, still knows the truth remains. As we reach the end of Herbert Carr's story, we return to where it began. A quiet morning in northern Germany. September 10th, 1983. A 34-year-old man leaves home at approximately 6:15 a.m. He is heading to work. His route is familiar. His destination is ordinary. There is nothing in the available record suggesting that this day should be remembered differently from any other. Yet somewhere between departure and arrival, something happened. Something significant enough to end a life. Something significant enough to generate questions that investigators are still asking more than for decades later. Today, the name Herbert Carrs is associated with one of Germany's enduring unsolved murder cases. But before he became a case file, before he became a mystery, he was a husband, a worker, and a man living an ordinary life. That may be the most important thing to remember. The purpose of revisiting cases like this is not simply to examine unanswered questions. It is also to remember the person at the center of them. The investigation remains open. The theories remain unproven. The evidence remains incomplete. And the identity of the killer remains unknown. But somewhere within the passage of time, among fading memories and forgotten details, the truth still exists. Whether that truth will ever be fully uncovered remains uncertain. For now, the story of Herbert Carrs ends where all cold cases end, not with certainty, but with a question. After more than 40 years, is there still someone who knows exactly what happened to Herbert Carrs on the morning of September 10th, 1983? And if so, will they ever tell the world? Long after an investigation grows quiet, long after newspaper headlines disappear and public attention moves elsewhere, certain cases continue to linger. They remain present not because of what is known, but because of what is unknown. The murder of Herbert Carrs belongs to that category. More than 4 decades have passed since he left home on the morning of September 10th, 1983. Yet the case continues to occupy a unique place among Germany's unresolved homicide investigations. It is a case defined not by a lack of evidence, but by the inability of that evidence to form a complete and undeniable explanation. When examining cold cases, investigators often ask a simple question. If this crime were committed today, would it be solved? Modern forensic science has transformed criminal investigations. Advances in DNA analysis, digital records, surveillance technology, and communication tracking have provided investigators with tools that were unimaginable in earlier decades. Yet Herbert Carrs disappeared in 1983 in a very different investigative era. The information available to detectives was shaped by the technology of the time, and many opportunities that might exist in a modern investigation were simply unavailable. that reality creates an unavoidable sense of uncertainty. How much evidence was lost before investigators even realized a murder had occurred? How many observations went unreported because witnesses did not yet understand their significance? How many details vanished during the weeks between Herbert's disappearance and the discovery of his body? Those questions can never be answered with certainty, but they help explain why the case remains unsolved despite decades of effort. One of the most fascinating aspects of the investigation is the way seemingly ordinary objects became central mysteries. Consider the safe key. In everyday life, a key is an unremarkable item. It exists to provide access and security. Yet in this case, the disappearance of the supermarket safe key transformed it into a potential clue. Investigators had to ask whether it represented motive, opportunity, or merely coincidence. The difficulty is that the available evidence supports multiple possibilities. If the key was important, then it may have been one of the reasons Herbert was targeted. If it was not important, then investigators may have spent years considering a clue that ultimately led nowhere. Cold cases often operate within this space of ambiguity, where certainty remains just beyond reach. The same can be said for the missing money. Approximately 30,000 Deutsche Marks had reportedly been withdrawn before Herbert disappeared. Financial mysteries naturally attract attention because they seem as though they should have straightforward explanations. Money is withdrawn. Money is spent. Money goes somewhere. Yet this case demonstrates that reality is not always so simple. The withdrawals may have been connected to the crime. They may have been completely unrelated. They may have represented a critical clue. They may have represented a coincidence that happened to exist alongside a murder investigation. Without additional evidence, investigators cannot move beyond possibilities. Then there is the vehicle. The mustard yellow Toyota Corolla has become one of the most recognizable elements of the case because it appears repeatedly throughout the timeline. Herbert drove it. Witnesses reportedly saw it after he vanished. It eventually surfaced at the bottom of the Elbe River. In many ways, the car serves as a symbol of the investigation itself. It moved through the story without ever fully revealing its secrets. People reportedly saw it, yet no definitive identification of the driver emerged. It existed as a clue, but not as a solution. Its recovery answered one question: what happened to the vehicle, but failed to answer the larger question of who had control of it. That pattern repeats throughout the entire investigation. Each answer seems partial. Each discovery appears incomplete. The result is a case that feels perpetually unfinished. Perhaps that is why the murder of Herbert Cars continues to attract attention decades later. Human beings are naturally drawn to unresolved stories. We want causes to have effects. We want questions to have answers. We want investigations to produce conclusions. When those conclusions never arrive, the mystery remains active in the minds of those who encounter it. But there is another reason the case continues to matter. Justice is not measured only by convictions. Justice is also measured by persistence. Every time investigators review old evidence, every time a cold case is reopened, every time authorities ask the public for information, they communicate an important message. The victim has not been forgotten. In 2021, when the case was presented once again to the public through Aktenzeichen XY Ungelost, that message became clear. Decades had passed, yet investigators still believed the truth might be discovered. More than 40 tips reportedly followed. Some were considered promising. None produced an immediate resolution, but the response demonstrated that people were still willing to help. That willingness matters. Many cold cases are ultimately solved not because of a dramatic breakthrough, but because someone remembers something. A conversation, a vehicle, a name, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time. Human memory can be unreliable, but it can also be remarkably persistent. Somewhere, someone may still remember September 1983. Somewhere, someone may still recall seeing a yellow Toyota Corolla. Somewhere, someone may possess a piece of information they never realized was important. Whether that information will ever emerge remains unknown. And so, as this story comes to a close, we are left with the same mystery that investigators have faced for more than 40 years. A 34-year-old supermarket manager left home for work. He never arrived. His body was later discovered in a drainage shaft. He had been shot. His personal belongings were missing. His safe key was missing. His vehicle continued to appear after his disappearance before ultimately being found in the Elba River. Investigators explored numerous theories. No theory was ever proven. No suspect was convicted. No courtroom established the truth. What remains today is not a solved case, but a collection of questions waiting for answers. Who killed Herbert Cars? Why was he targeted? What happened to the missing money? Why was the safe key taken? Who drove the Toyota Corolla after he disappeared? And why, after all these years, has nobody been able to connect every piece of the puzzle together? Perhaps the answers still exist. Perhaps they remain hidden in forgotten memories, overlooked documents, or information never shared with investigators. Or perhaps the truth has been carried silently by someone for decades. Until that truth emerges, the murder of Herbert Cars will remain what it has been for more than 40 years. A haunting reminder that not every crime reaches a conclusion, not every mystery receives an answer, and not every victim receives the justice they deserve. For now, the final chapter has not been written. The case remains open. The questions remain, and the search for the truth continues.